Okay. Well, welcome everybody. Thank you so much for being with us today. I know we've got folks from across a lot of time zones. So my name's Liberty, and I'm a member of the Firestorm Collective. And today we're really excited to be hosting author Matt Broomfield in conversation with scholars Azize Aslan and John Holloway. And they're going to be discussing Matt's new book, Hope Without Hope, Rojava and Revolutionary Commitment. Just a little bit of background in case you haven't been to one of our events before. Firestorm is a 17-year-old radical bookstore owned and operated by a queer feminist collective in Southern Appalachia on the land of the Cherokee people. And we do a lot of events in person, but also love to have occasional conversations online like this one, both because it allows us to connect with authors and speakers at a distance, like today, and also because we know that even here in our own community, there's a lot of folks for whom gathering in person can be difficult. So if you're interested in our upcoming calendar, including a number of events with AK Press authors, then I would encourage you to check out our website. We've got upcoming discussions with Rashida Phillips, Janina Abrin-Irving, and Robin Maynard, among others. So lots of great conversations. And just a note on our format today, we are using Zoom, and there's a Q&A tool as well as an open chat. I would encourage you to use both, but if you have questions for the panel, and I hope you do, then it would be great if you could write those out as you think of them using the Q&A tool. That'll help us to keep track of them. And then at the end, hopefully we'll have a bit of time to pull some of the questions and have a bit of conversation about them. But please do write them out as you think about them. It's always nice to get to the end and already have some questions. So without further ado, I think we're going to get started with a few quick biographies. Just want to introduce the folks we've got today, starting with Matt. Matt Broomfield is a British journalist, poet, and organizer. From 2018 to 2020, he spent 3 years living and working in Rojava, where he co-founded the Rojava Information Center, the top independent English language news source connecting the Kurdish-led autonomous regions with the international press. Matt's writing has appeared in The Independent, New Statesman, Vice, The Nation, and Jacobin, among others. Thanks so much, Matt, for being here.
Thank you.
We are also privileged to have Dr. Azize Aslan here, who is the author of Anti-Capitalist Economy in Rojava, The Contradictions of Revolution in the Kurdish Struggle. She was awarded a PhD in sociology at the Institute of Social Sciences and Humanities, Benemérita Universidad Autónoma de Puebla in Mexico, and received the Jorge Alonso Chair Award in 2021 for her work on the women's economics and cooperativism in Kurdistan. Thank you so much for being here, Azize. And last but not least, John Holloway, who teaches in the Graduate School of Sociology in the Benemérita Universidad Autónoma de Puebla. He has written widely on anti-capitalist struggles and the meaning of revolution today. You may know his books, Change the World Without Taking Power, Crack Capitalism, and Hope in Hopeless Times, all of which have been translated into over a dozen languages. So it's a huge honor to have all of you here today. And I am going to go ahead and pass to Matt to give us a bit of an introduction to the new book.
Hi, everyone. Yeah, to repeat that, yeah, I'm really happy to be here. Thanks a lot to Firestorm for setting this up. Yeah, I like increasing numbers of people in this present era. I'm not able to travel myself to America, so I'm really glad for this opportunity, to speak to some of you folks over there and possibly from across the world as well, but also maybe more importantly to have this like three-way discussion with Azize and with John, both of whom are based in Mexico and both of whom do really important work on some of the key themes that are in the book. John very kindly wrote the foreword, and I'm really glad that we have this opportunity to discuss between the three of us and hopefully reflect off one another a bit. So just in terms of how we or what I thought would kind of make sense with this discussion. In a minute, I'm going to read, like from the book for just like 10 minutes. So a short, very short kind of whistle stop through the first couple of pages, which hopefully give a flavour of what the book is like and what it's about. And we will then discuss a bit, and John and Azize will join in, in terms of their particular fields of expertise, which we will discuss after I read. Maybe just to begin, before I read, just by sort of saying a couple of words about the very basic context of where this book comes from and why I wrote it. I think probably most people who are here in the event today will know what Rojava is, but just in case, people are, we think it's always good just to explain the sort of very basic context, which is the Kurdish movement has for some time, the revolutionary Kurdish movement, rather than fighting for an independent Kurdish state in which the Kurdish people could have their own kind of nation state, instead pursues what it describes as this commune of communes, so a grassroots bottom-up network which repudiates or rejects the nation state as inherently repressive, and instead relies particularly on women and women's role in creating autonomy within society and the empowerment of local communities, including through a cooperative economy. And that's the sort of political vision they pursue. In the course of the Syrian civil war, they had the opportunity to begin trying to implement this vision on the ground. In the course of that endeavor, which is sort of the one of the key themes of the book, is how did this utopian vision develop amid the catastrophe of the Syrian civil war? Then a number of international people, myself included, travelled out there to volunteer, to witness and experience that revolution firsthand. So in my case, I travelled out as a journalist, and I worked in the media field, as was mentioned, and was sort of privileged to follow those processes at first hand for a number of years, and to speak with a lot of people there about what was going on and get to understand what Azize also calls the contradictions and the struggles kind of that are inherent in that revolutionary process. So that's the sort of background. Then as to why this book, there are a number of very good books that I think explain what is Rojava, what is the Rojava revolution. Azize has a very good book on the contradictions of the Rojava revolution, as I mentioned, and the cooperative economy, which gives one great overview. Dila Durik, for example, has another excellent book on the revolutionary Kurdish women's movement. What I wanted to do with this book really was to reflect on something that, I suppose, is the sort of personal experience I had of reflecting on how I sort of felt personally kind of, very despairing about prospects for the movements and struggles I was involved in the West, and what they could do, and the limitations that we faced, the setbacks we faced. But yet, on the one hand, I could sort of see in myself that despite those sensations, I continued to organize and I continued to be involved in things. And then, probably more importantly, I was able to see in Syria, this situation seems a lot worse. It seems kind of hellish. It is hellish for ordinary people who live there, but nonetheless, there is this commitment, this drive to produce something new, something bigger, something better. And that was sort of that was the sort of question that I set out to answer. I think it's part of why I went to Kurdistan in the first place, and it was something that I certainly set out to think about through writing this book. And that's kind of where I came to John's work, because John, as we'll discuss, has also done similar work on how other social movements have found ways to hope in the face of apparent hopelessness, and the different forms that hope can take when you sort of, I suppose, get out of the mindsets of some of the more conventional ways we might think about political organization in the West. So that, is sort of where I'm coming from. So as I said, I'm now just going to read, like the introduction from the book, or the shortened version thereof, and we will then open up the conversation a little bit. Thank you. On the eve of battle against Turkey, Kurdish fighters gather around a smartphone, tarnished AK-47s slung over skinny shoulders. These men aren't supposed to own phones, but they all have contraband Alcatels anyway, using them mostly to fill the long, dull interludes between combat by playing combat games. The clip they are watching is popular here in Rojava, or Syrian Kurdistan. In a scene from the blood-spattered blockbuster 300, we witness the run-up to the Spartan resistance against the Persian invasion at Thermopylae. Spartan warriors beat swords on shields, preparing for certain death. The Kurdish militants likewise stamp their feet on the earth behind the berm and chant, wordlessly, in unison. Within a week, I think to myself, some of these men will be dead. In the film, as in the legend, the Spartans are all also subsequently slaughtered, but no matter. There's a perverse optimism to the way in which dubbed Hollywood clips circulate through Syrian Kurdish WhatsApp groups, wrenched out of context and deployed in support of whatever political, military, or perhaps more often romantic ideal the viewer has in mind. It's little wonder the region's Kurdish-led revolutionary forces feel an affinity with the embattled Spartans. In the face of crises set to define the coming century, their movement has produced an unexpected and utopian response, striving to implement a unique form of direct democratic, women-led, multi-ethnic governance. Yet even after liberating millions of Syrians from the brutal, misogynist, theofascist rule of the Islamic State of Iraq and the Levant, or ISIS, they must perpetually battle repeated Turkish military operations aimed at extinguishing these fragile victories. Turkey has the American warplanes, the German tanks, the second largest army in NATO, proxy militias packed with former ISIS fighters. The Kurdish revolutionaries have nothing save their rusty AK-47s and a handful of bleak myths, into which they read calls for hope. These militants follow the intellectual and philosophical lead of jailed Kurdish leader Abdullah Öcalan and his Kurdistan Workers' Party, or PKK. In theory and practice, in extremis and in their unexpected revolutionary triumph, the broader cluster of parties, armed groups and civil society organisations inspired by the PKK and collectively known as the Kurdish Freedom Movement has proven itself capable of finding, maintaining and organising hope throughout political crisis and social catastrophe. It was in response to historic defeats suffered by the PKK during the broader post-1989 collapse of state socialism that Öcalan initially developed his bold political programme of grassroots democracy, women's autonomy and minority rights. Similarly, it was the catastrophe of the Syrian civil war beginning in 2011 that enabled his movement to put this programme into practice, following the outbreak of what is now known as the Rojava Revolution in 2012. In the course of this revolution, Kurdish militants have battled not only drone strikes and ethnic cleansing, but also the same challenges faced by many of us on the global left each day: pessimism, despair, even suicide. Yet the existential nature of this struggle, the repeated losses and terrible sacrifices, paradoxically enabled the Kurdish movement to unite 4 million Kurds, Arabs, and ethnic minority Christians and Yazidis. By answering defeats with this revolutionary faith and transformation, the Kurdish movement and its foot soldiers placed themselves in a particular tradition of anti-fascist and anti-colonial resistance, absurdist philosophy, and radical thought. This current of hope without hope flows unseen through the millennia to explode into the world as revolutionary fervour bound up with madness, self-delusion, and self-sacrifice, as dogged resistance in the face of savage colonial violence and omnipotent, omnipresent, state-backed neoliberal hegemony, as the mystic utopian socialist horizon that has long justified the most grueling and mundane political organisation. Though it might sometimes seem otherwise, this strange, backward hope hasn't been extinguished by the dead weight of late capitalist hegemony. During 3 years living and working in Rojava, I found this spirit alive and well. And we may also follow this current down to our own diverse struggles, communities and movements, equipping us to shoulder our own revolutionary tasks in a similar spirit of grim defiance. We certainly need it. The Syrian civil war, it's now increasingly clear, is this century's equivalent of the Spanish Civil War. It has prefigured an emergent and still poorly understood global conflict, just as that struggle between ascendant fascist forces and a doomed yet courageous socialist opposition prefigured the slaughter of World War II. The coming international conflict, which Öcalan has long described as World War III, is set to be defined by factors that have already marked the Syrian conflict, namely proxy warfare, resource competition, state collapse, mass displacement, political shockwaves emanating from the Middle East to shake the centres of imperial power, Islamist, right nationalist, or even Christo-fascist militancy as the main vector of resistance to the authoritarian state, the simultaneous statist exploitation of these reactionary forces, and all of it precipitated by rising temperatures, desertification, failed harvests, and the weaponization of water resources. This global crisis certainly demands an effective internationalist left, capable of organizing global resistance and exploiting the opportunities brought about by coming socio-political crises. But no internationalist movement has yet emerged to respond to our era of pandemic, climate catastrophe, and resurgent state conflict. As Israel's genocidal 2023 war in Gaza has painfully shown, the world waits in vain for a resurgent and militant internationalism genuinely capable of resisting authoritarian state violence in the Middle East and worldwide. Yet, as recent theorists have variously argued, the Arab Spring, subsequent pan-continental protest movements, and brief flourishing of social democratic left populism were all undone by organizational and strategic shortcomings. Instead, millions have spent the past decade squandering their own hopeless hope at the ballot box, particularly in the Anglosphere in Western Europe, on barricades, particularly in South America and East Asia, or under a hail of bullets, particularly in the Middle East. Individual movements, uprising, and communities may have achieved fleeting or local victories, but there is no point in downplaying the general failure of the internationalist left to pose meaningful mass opposition to state-sanctioned capitalist hegemony in a single state worldwide. No wonder so many of us feel defeated. And yet, we continue to struggle for a better world, even a world we cannot believe in. How do we manage it? How is it we strive longer, harder, and more boldly than those liberal progressives who claim to hold more optimistic outlooks for the future? How is it that the hopeless still hope? For if the Kurdish movement does offer a superlative example of revolutionary commitment in hopeless circumstances, this same spirit also animates 1,000 smaller land struggles, picket lines, rent strikes, and indigenous insurgencies worldwide. Each day, admittedly weak and localized forces still somehow find the courage to withstand hegemonic capitalist powers they stand virtually no chance of overthrowing. If there's no point in deceiving ourselves over the hitherto limited nature of our victories, therefore, neither is there any point in wallowing in defeatism. The Kurdish movement continues to reckon with its own defeats and shortcomings as part of complex strategic efforts to build up a radical alternative, learning from both the fatal internal contradictions of top-down state socialism and the proven organizational weakness of bottom-up anarchist organization. The question is, can our movements do the same, in particular by deriving lessons from the Kurdish movement's own historic defeats, battlefield triumphs, and ongoing struggles? Thank you.
Thanks so much for sharing that introductory passage, Matt. Yeah, I just reflecting on the importance of this book, I don't feel like I've been part of an event or a book club or a conversation or an author talk in the last year in which people didn't ask the question of where does hope come from and how do we find hope. So I think this is an extremely timely conversation and book. In your writing, you argue that the lessons of the Kurdish movement are less about the particulars of their organizational structure and more something, I guess, psychological. And I'm curious if you could share a little bit about what that means to you and maybe what those lessons are.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think you're absolutely right that this is a question which is very much in the air. And so I think, well, I suppose when I speak about psychological lessons, that's something that comes both from the political moment we're in and also something that comes from the Kurdish movement's like self-theorization and its own approach to revolution. So in terms of, the broader political movement, then, as you say, I think there's a sort of a great sense, there is a great desire, and I think a bit greater desire than there has been at other points, in the past decades, on behalf of many people in America and worldwide, to do something. There's a recognition things are getting worse, partly due to political changes in America, partly due to the climate crisis and for other reasons as well. But there's a kind of like a sort of, I suppose, a sort of a floundering and a searching, on behalf of a lot of people for what to do with that energy. And as I said, often that's sort of flowed into projects which have failed to achieve their stated aims, like for a number of reasons. But one of the things which I think, has come out of that is, a reflection on, the limitations of a model of hope, maybe, which looks more like optimism or which is more reformist. And I think that's something which, sort of when we speak about this, sort of, we're talking, about revolution or revolutionary changes. It's something which sounds very kind of grand and very big, but it's also something which I think can start from this very pragmatic sense that, okay, the options on hand to us are not working, and that should free us for something bigger than ourselves. So I suppose there's a number of books that I've read which some of which I draw on in this. So right now actually I'm reading this book, Cruel Optimism, from about 10 years ago by Lauren Berlant, where she sort of speaks about optimism as something. Cruel optimism is when you hope for something, but that hope actually sort of makes it worse because you're not going to get it. And the sort of key case studies there, right, or the reason that's so relevant now is the idea that there could be a life worth having under capitalism is a promise which is held out to people but which isn't fulfilled, and the act of sort of hoping for that, sort of saying, okay, maybe if I knuckle down and maybe if I get, sort of I do good, I might get lucky and things might get better for me, and that that has been true, and is still true for some people in the capitalist system, but more and more what's being promised doesn't match up to reality. So in that way, those tensions are getting bigger, and I think that's true then in terms of our political organization, and there's a sense that even the limited goals that we're struggling towards are not working, and so what do we do with that? That then, I think, for me, as I sort of suggested at the beginning, was a key factor in going to Kurdistan, in terms of I've sort of, like, I suppose a lot of people listening, was involved in different social movements and struggles in the UK and Europe. But it was always kind of firefighting, it was always, okay, we've managed to prevent this deportation, we've managed to keep this squat open, we've managed to feed some people, whatever it might be. For some other people, it might be, okay, we've managed to get, this many people out to vote for Bernie, I don't know. But, in all cases, I was sort of tired, right, of being on the back foot, of kind of firefighting, of I suppose, losing even in this very small frame, and I felt personally despairing of that, and so that was part of why I wanted to see this Rojava in practice, right? This thing, which, if it's spoken about on the left, is often spoken about in quite like utopian or idealized terms, and I wanted to see for myself, what does that actually look like materially? They say they've won, they say their revolution has happened. What's actually happening? How is that experience day to day? And then I think there are a lot of big kind of macro political lessons that I learned from that, and which I discussed in the book, and I think we'll probably speak about a little later on, in terms of how do you organize and how do you deal with crisis and catastrophe and ethnic cleansing. But there was also the opportunity to spend a lot of time with the Kurdish political movement, and one thing that they're very clear about is that political organization starts from the self, and there needs to be a sort of a kind of subjective process which they then work together to achieve, right, of overcoming I suppose that kind of defeatism, like within yourself. And that's one of the aspects of sort of a liberal individualism that Kurdish comrades were very critical of, and those of us who went there from the West, and sort of in different ways, and an inability to get beyond this kind of cynicism, to get beyond defeatism, to get beyond this kind of almost like a failure of imagination, I suppose. And that's something which definitely comes from from the Kurdish women's movement, which has sort of a strong critique of this kind of overly rationalistic approach to political organization that comes also from their experiences organizing in a very patriarchal society, and organizing in a like Marxist-Leninist organization as it was at the time, and a sort of challenge, I suppose, sort of challenge to that, which I suppose for me sort of certainly manifested as this, and still manifests as this cynicism, defeatism, an inability to imagine that things might be otherwise. And so that was I think that was a huge challenge for me. And then in the book, I suppose I speak about there's a lot of different things that looks like. I think sort of particularly important, or maybe one point that I can spotlight in terms of why do I speak about psychological rather than organizational, or alongside organizational issues, is they sort of have an idea, I suppose, of collective autonomy, right? That this is a revolution which is against the state, which is against centralization, which recognizes, as I think many of us do, the dangers that might be inherent in a more top-down political approach, in a more, I don't know, parliamentary focused political approach, or electoral political approach, as it might be in the West. But that doesn't mean that what they're saying is, well, everyone can sort of do what you want, and they're equally strong in their critique of what they would see as a more individualized, like liberal identity politics, and they're able to kind of draw on both of those traditions, and sort of get over, I think, a bit, we all have this opposition in our head, don't we, between sort of the material sort of organization and the like individual expression, and this is the sort of the classic back and forth which has preoccupied a lot of us on the left, to sort of to caricature a bit, but across the past 15 years, and say there are forms of autonomy, there are forms of self-expression which come when you give up on that individualism and on what you might personally want. And for them, most obviously that's about sort of women's autonomy and women coming together, organizing like as women, and sort of giving up sort of on maybe a little bit on themselves and how they might individually feel, but in order to care more for their comrades and care for those around them. And that sort of approach, I think, sort of is difficult without, sort of challenging some of the reservations that we might have. And that was a very difficult process for people there, certainly, obviously also for us as international volunteers there. And also, it's difficult to think about and to do in our own communities. But I think, beginning with that sort of, like the radical critique of the self as the Kurdish movement does, is a very important starting point.
Thank you so much for that. I want to make sure we go ahead and bring John and Azize into the conversation. So maybe I'll hold a few more questions for later, and we can go ahead and broaden it here.
So as it was sort of off the back of what I was saying, I think it's a good point to turn to John, because I think John and I also think slightly differently about some of these issues, as he also suggested in the foreword. So I think so sort of as I was saying, that the Kurdish movement offers a model of this, I suppose, kind of radical commitment in organizational terms, doesn't it? A sort of giving up of the self to enter into this larger, more disciplined movement, a movement which places great demands on those who are part of it, which has this kind of strict internal organizational structure. And John, I suppose when you look at that model of kind of commitment that's in the Kurdish movement, do you think it can work? Do you see dangers in it? And do you see that model reflected in the experiences of other social movements that you work on?
Yeah, I'm not sure about that. But before, I wanted to say something else. I think the book is terrific. I really do. I mean, I know it's the kind of polite thing you ought to say at the beginning of a book presentation, but I was going through it again over the weekend and this morning, and I really think it's a terrific book. And it's terrific because it confronts us with our own madness. You asked the question, you said that now in the introduction, how is it that the hopeless still hope? And of course, and you bring it up a number of times, you bring it up with a quotation from Bakunin. I mean, I think any of us, and I suppose this includes the people who are connected to this debate, or who will listen to it later on, we're probably all mad, or at least we all think, we all have the suspicion that maybe we're completely starking mad. And you confront that, and I think that's very important. What Liberty was saying at the beginning, I mean, how on earth she was saying that in all these conversations, the question of hope comes up over and over again. And how do we maintain hope in the present situation when we're seem to be going deeper and deeper into catastrophe? You mentioned it yourself. I mean, climate catastrophe, growing threat of world war, Trump, all the rise of the new right, Gaza. Now, how on earth can you maintain how can you keep on thinking about hope in this situation? And all the time we try and understand how we can hope, or what the grounds of hope are. And all the time there's this voice at the back of our head saying, but maybe you're mad. And we all have that. I mean, if we work in the university, as I do, I mean, obviously mainstream sociology, mainstream social sciences, it dismisses us as bad or irrelevant, or so that And for lots of people, I suppose it'll be their parents or their friends who are saying, no, but that's ridiculous. No, and you've got, in a way, your question is the same, but it's the same in a different way. I mean, that you come back from this obviously extremely intense experience in Rojava, and your question, I think, after that, well, no, I mean, this is hopeless. And I suppose in some sense you're thinking, well, am I mad? Are we mad to carry on? No, and you try to deal with that. And I suppose
think,
that's...
Yeah, I think we are. I mean, one of the things which, I suppose I come to in the book, and which actually, Lauren Berlant says in Cruel Optimism I'm reading at the moment is, well, it's all madness, isn't it? And that certainly there is a madness to, believing that we can build a better world, but then there's also a madness in our day-to-day existence. There's a madness to believing that if you work hard, you can, sort of secure yourself, a comfortable life. There's a madness in believing that if there's business as usual under capitalism, there's going to be a planet worth inhabiting or in 50 or 100 years. And I think I think it can be helpful now to recognize that as something which is, we're mad, but so is everyone else. And then it becomes almost a question of picking your poison.
I'm not sure if it is a question of picking your poison. I think there's perhaps a separation, it's a different type of madness. I mean, one thing is, yes, of course, we're mad to think, oh, everything will be fine, in 50. There's not going to be any war. We'll solve climate warming, etc. I mean, I think that's really mad. But I think we've got a qualitatively different madness, I suppose, when we say, well, we need to get rid of a system based on the rule of money. We need to get rid of a system based on capital. We need to get rid of the state. No? And there's a sanity in that, if you like. There's a sanity because the argument is, well, if we don't, then we really are heading into disaster, catastrophe, possibly extinction. But this sanity is a sanity that also seems so impossible. It seems absolutely necessary, but also seems absolutely impossible. And that leaves us, of course, with a kind of constant self-questioning, or it should do. No?
Yeah.
And the danger is, of course, that we don't. We go off to Rojava like you did and come back and say, oh, yes, fantastic. That's the way forward. Or we go down to Chiapas here in Mexico. We see the Zapatistas and we say, fantastic. Yes, that's the way forward. And I think that's right. We have to say that in both cases. But we also have to come back with the self-questioning and saying, yes, that's the way forward, but is it really going to be the answer?
Yeah,
No?
and I think, so maybe the Kurdish movement themselves, they would frame what we're talking about in maybe in slightly different terms, but they're kind of expressing the same thing in terms of what they're doing as a challenge to sort of capitalist patriarchal rationality and a sort of perceived sanity, a perceived logic in the order of things, which they would say is fundamentally flawed. And a lot of that comes from the Kurdish women's movement. So I wonder, maybe I could, Azize, I could invite you to maybe speak a little bit about that, and how does, as you understand it, how does the Kurdish women's movement perceive their challenge to the logic and the ordering of pre-existing patriarchal society, and does that relate to what we are talking about?
So, hi everyone, and hi Matt and John again. So, thank you for invitation. Firstly, I consider this is very valuable to this group because we are still thinking about the revolution in this century. you mean there is a hopeless time, but we're thinking about the revolution and revolutionary theory and the strategy. I think it's very, very important, this. So for just my confession, I never think about the hope because I never lost. And I always have a hope because I don't know, maybe I'm Kurdish, because I'm coming to Kurdistan, I'm part of the a struggle. For this, I never think about the hope when I until when I met John. Maybe we just start to think together about the hope, and maybe my thesis, my PhD thesis, and my book also, it's like a think about the practice of the hope. Yeah, it's not like a theory, but it's the practice of the hope, how it's the in the ground, in the struggle. It's maybe I'm thinking about this. Yeah, but let me just say you, Matt, it's congratulations. It's really, John says, the terrific book. It's, for me, it's very comprehensive book. Really, it's so important. Because you are brought a lot of revolutionary radical thinkers. I'm not familiar with them really, but also your practice of thinking about the practice and the theory of the from the Europe to Rojava, and the Rojava from the international level. I think it's make very rich your book, and really it's not easy book. It was very hard to read all the book because like John say, you need the challenge with your madness also, and your limits also, and your psychological aspect of your life. It's I think it was very, I sometimes I agree with you in the book, but in sometimes I just think it will be very great to speak more about this. But after that, I want to argue with you, and I want to fight with you because maybe I'm a Kurdish woman for this, but it's really, I'm not saying the like a negatively way. There is a just I have a more desire to make a more debate and deeper conversation about your book. I think it's time sufficient, but I think we will continue to make a next conversation in maybe another places. So I want to start really in end of your book. You have a part, you say your confession about why you went to Rojava. Just you in the introduction also you say, yeah, but you say you went to report and work in Rojava because you was tired of the Western left's repeated flares, tried of the firefighting, and tried of the taking soilness in teeny and temporary victories. So this is the your way why you went to Rojava, but you bring a lot of another things, yeah. And just when I read your book, I remember in my first year I was in Chiapas for making a workshop about genealogy and the Kurdish women movement in Chiapas, in San Cristobal de las Casas. When I went to place where we organized the workshop, there was for me it was very surprised because there was a lot of women from Europe to come to participate the genealogy workshop in Chiapas. So it was like
maybe you can just explain quickly for people what's genealogy in case people don't know.
Genealogy is like genealogy is the term of we are doing the collective reflection about how we can create the women's sciences and based on the experience of the Kurdish women and Kurdish women's struggle, and like make a theory and the practice of the anti-patriarchal society. So I will talk about the genealogy and the aspect of the genealogy, how we can we are organizing in Rojava, but it's in this time it was very strange because women seems like a white European and modern and city woman, yeah, or urban woman. So I was talking about the genealogy, but I asked them why they are in Chiapas, why they are also want to participate a workshop about genealogy in Chiapas, and what they are doing in Chiapas, because there was not, I mean, there was not indigenous women in the workshop. All the women, it was from the Europe or and other Latin countries, maybe from the Chile and Argentina, and so they tell me it's like it's the same what you say. They were tired. They were tired their search in Europe, and they participated some collectives, and they have a distance from their countries and their movements, and they just want to go to another place to learn from another struggles. And then they came to Chiapas from learned from Zapatistas. So, and their participation, the genealogy workshop also it was the same. They want to learn more about the another struggle and the Kurdish struggle and Kurdish women's struggle in Chiapas. I mean, it was very, for me, it's strange because where is the coming to this desire of to learn, yeah? Why we want to learn from another struggles, yeah? I think it's in this sense is
yes, and I think it's also, you know, maybe there are these cases of people going to Rojava to volunteer or going to Chiapas that maybe they're kind of like quite extreme cases, but it's something which also I think is very general, and I think it's also a big part of the kind of internationalist like solidarity that is happening in the world now, like something that I think is positive in kind of left movements compared to when, you know, I think back to like 10-15 years ago, is that it feels to me like there is a stronger sense of like internationalist support and commitment for global struggles. And I think, of course, partly that's just because people see what's happening and they want to support, but I think in terms of people in the West, it's also because they feel something in these movements and these experiences that they are lacking and they want to access. So, you know, even if people are not going to Rojava, for example, but, you know, they're coming and they're kind of protesting, you know, for Gaza, for example, it's also because I think they, you know, they feel a desire to be part of something bigger than themselves, I think, and they feel that sort of, a need, I don't know, almost for a kind of seriousness. And I think, some people also, they found that in, kind of changing their political approach. You know, if I think about friends of mine from anarchist left who ended up in, almost ended up in these social democratic movements, there was something of that in there as well, a desire to like reconnect and be part of something bigger, maybe to be part of something that feels more sort of, like effectively, effectively transnational. But then I think, that desire is there, and then the question, I suppose, is when those people come to those movements, and whether that's physically or just intellectually or just in conversation like this, what are the lessons that are there to be learned? And this question that you said about the sort of the practice of hope that you're interested with, I think is a very important one. But maybe you could expand a bit what you meant by that. Hope as a practice, not as a concept.
With this, maybe I just want to say is like a practice of hope for me. It's if we want to learn from another experience, and then we need to ask what we are doing with we learned the another struggles, and we need to make a transform to our practice. And in this sense, I mean, is for example, it's maybe in Rojava is different because people, international volunteers there, they have a different kind of the participation and work and the kind of way of the support. I mean, you can go to the battle, you can go to the make a notice, you can go to the make another work in Rojava. But for example, in another places, we are not just talking about Rojava. Yeah, we are talking about how we can, how we need to connect with the all the this revolutionary project and the movements. So, but there is an issue. I think it's we're learning, but we are not doing we are not convert the practice of the hope. Yeah. Because, for example, I know a lot of people coming to Chiapas and going to Rojava and other places, always to desire with the desire of the learn, but after that they not practice in their daily life. I mean, is for example, you can see in San Cristobal de las Casas a lot of international people living like a life. It's not close to the indigenous life. It's not close to what proposed the Zapatista movement, like produced autonomy, like produced the anti-capitalistic practice. It's not like adjustment, but it's about the social transformation. It's about how we can transform us, because I mean, is the Kurdish women say, yeah, is the say it always is the like in genealogy is the first part of the genealogy. You have to firstly recognize yourself, what I am doing, what I reproducing in life. And in this sense, for example, if we are still going to living like with drugs, with alcohol, with the gossip, with the very individual life, very capitalistic way of the life. And then I'm asking what we learned from the another struggles. Yeah.
Yeah. Although I think for me, certainly, as you say, sort of the Kurdish movement has this very radical challenge that, sort of you have to start with the sort of critique of yourself and where do you come from, how were you brought up, how were you socialized, and, what is the reality in your community, and that for them is kind of the beginning of political practice as a man, critiquing how you were raised as a man, and so on. But that always is, is, I guess, not with the idea to say, oh, things are just good the way we do them here and they're just bad the way that you do them over there in Europe. Maybe, sometimes it can feel a little bit like that, and it's probably not completely wrong, but I think it was something, that was for me personally, and maybe this book is a part of that process, that I was actually impressed by their desire to take seriously like the positive things that or to challenge you to find what is good, like in your surroundings and your society, as well as what is just kind of purely negative. And that, for them, you weren't saying this, but the answer is not everyone should leave and give up in the West and just do things exactly like we do it in the Kurdish movement, but to maybe learn from some of those ideas, but also understand them like in your like in your context and your society. So maybe a couple of specific examples. And for me, one thing was certainly was something that I speak about in the book, was going through this sort of process of having been sort of very angry at the like way I was brought up, like religiously, and actually was Kurdish comrades saying, well, okay, yeah, sure, like there is the critique for religion and how it works in your society, but there is also positive things in that, and you have to see, what are they doing in the local community? What are they bringing? What values did they teach to you that are revolutionary values? Rather than just saying, all that's bad and everything in the West is bad, right? But sort of taking that and working with it. And I think that's then, and that's the challenge that the Kurdish movement certainly offers directly to those international people who go out and follow there, but also more generally, right, is to, really understand your surroundings and not be kind of cut off from them and not sort of retreat, as, we might be apt to do on the left, and whether that means, sort of really sort of getting cut off from societies because we're just like sort of living only with people who are already paid up and signed up to the revolutionary cause, or whether that means retreating, like you say, giving up and just whatever, like going and partying. Those are both kind of failures, and there's like a responsibility, I guess, to get and learn with people, where they're at, and think about what makes sense in your local community. So I mean, it's a small example, but since we're talking about it, like that, for example, in the Kurdish movement, like they're not the sort of the place of like socialization would not have alcohol in it, right? Because it's not part of their local culture, and they sort of just wouldn't come up. But maybe if you're going back and you're organizing in Ireland, it can look different. Yeah.
I don't want to make this is the
Yeah.
it's bad to this way of the life. Yeah.
Yes. I know.
The intention. I am just asking why. If, for example, you cannot drink in Zapatista community, you cannot drink in Rojava, yeah, because they have a life like in this way, and why, for example, it's the term of the we cannot make a reset this all the way of the life and other places, and for this, for me, it's to learn is important from the another experience. Also, I think it's staying, persisting, and building the community where we are coming from. It's also is important because in this time we can create our mode and our organization and our practice of or our strategy of the struggle in our community. If we are always going from the one collective another collective, and we have a choose to change, and we have a choose to not recognize our limits, our problems, conflict with the places, and we just change the places, and we are going to searching the different strategy of the revolutionary and other places, and then after that we cannot change our communities, or we cannot transform our identity, our mode of the participation. That is my point. Yeah.
Yes, and I think so, and I think that
the politics of the faith. Maybe you can. Yeah. You are talking about the politics of the faith. Yeah, but for me, it's not like a faith. It's like a staying and trying to make and the change and the transform. It's like.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that for me, it's that's really a question of hopelessness and hope, or it's a question about maybe optimism against hope as well. And if you I think our question is, what does it take then to be able to stay in one place and fight, and not to give up and move on to the next thing, then move on to what's in the news, or move on because you get frustrated in one situation and you burn out, or you fall out with those comrades and you go on to something else, or just to be kind of buffeted around, but to say, okay, this is what I'm doing and this is what I'm working on. And I think for me, that then needs this kind of a recognition, this kind of conversation about the challenges of that, and the idea, okay, maybe we're not going to see the benefits of this next year, maybe we're not going to see them in 10 years or in decades. And I think that again is something that can be learned from the Kurdish movement's practice and the sort of the very long-term way in which it sort of remained and continued to organize in sort of phases of heavy repression, and phases like they've been through in Rojava, where things have suddenly seemed more possible. But to sort of, I think, if you're sort of anchored in this a sort of deeper sense of the challenges that are faced, that allows you to have a more, I guess, almost like a long-term vision to sort of, you have a history, where you come from, your people, the struggle, what's been sacrificed, what you're going towards. Whereas, if, as we often are, we're sort of forced into feel like we're always creating something new, it's harder then to take those defeats and those setbacks when they come. I don't know if, John, what do you want to say?
I think I think this thing of going you went to Rojava, and lots of people have gone to Chiapas. There's a whole history, of course, of people in Europe, particularly, I suppose, getting excited about revolutions happening in different places. I mean, the same happened in Cuba in the 60s. No, because it seems to be, people are creating what Europeans, or we Europeans, or whatever, dream of creating in a way, or are desperate to create. And then, there's a big question about how you come back after that. And I think it's partly a question of learning lessons, fine. Partly it can be a question of, oh, I really don't like that. But what I think I like a lot about the book is that you talk about the experience and you talk about lessons to be learned, but you do it in a way that challenges us. No, and challenges, this is really a dreadful world. The Kurdish movement is opening up possibilities, but really it's fairly hopeless. You could go to the Zapatista communities and come back and say the same thing. And I think one thing that the Zapatistas have been expressing, I don't know if you've been following it really, since the meeting just at the end of December last year, is that they're talking about the importance of organizing our desperation. And that seems to me to just capture it wonderfully. It's our desperation, not despair, not despair. It's kind of recognition of a situation that can make us despair or makes us despair at times. A situation where we really seem to be moving into deeper and deeper catastrophe. And this makes us feel more and more desperate. Desperate is kind of a hanging on to hope, isn't it? It's not a hope without hope, as you have in your title. It's a hope against hope. It's a hope against hopelessness. But it's, how, this desperation, my God, that, we all feel it every day opening looking at the newspaper. And you see what's happening. You see what Trump is doing to the migrants, but not just Trump. This whole army of Trump supporters, the way in which they are treating migrants. You see what is happening in Gaza, the slaughter of people there, and you think, my God, this is a desperate situation. What can we do? What can we do? What can we do? Is there any way out? No, there has to be some way out of here, but maybe there isn't. No, and then you think, well, how can we get out? I think we have to hang on to the hope. I suppose that's, you're talking about absurdist hope, the importance of hanging on to hope when there's no hope. And I put it a little bit differently, I think, in terms of, no, we have to hang on to hope. We have to hang on to hope and find ways forward. In that sense, and I think that you're saying the same in slightly different ways. We cannot accept that there is no way out. We have to hang on to hope, partly because that's what makes us human. No, partly because things seem to be getting worse and worse, But we hang on to hope as well because we begin to recognize that the existence of hope, or the existence of this desperation, at least, all over the place. No, not just in the organized left, not only in the anarchist or Marxist left, but you kind of scratch the surface, and the number of people who will say, no, what is happening in Gaza is absolutely, totally unacceptable. No, I think there's that. The other way I think that we have to hang on to hope, or that we can justify our own madness, is by saying, okay, we feel we are losing all the time, but we are our hope, our struggles actually constitute the fragility of the system. No, we're not fighting against an all-powerful capitalism. We are actually fighting against a capitalism that, because of our resistance, is extremely fragile. No, there are ways of thinking forward. No, but
Yeah.
the important thing for me is really, to come back from Kurdistan and not just say, oh, there's the great white light of hope, which is true, or not come back and say, well, this is a failure or has all sorts of difficulties, which is also true, but to come back and say, well, this isn't just the problem of the Kurds, it is our problem. And how do we confront that? How do we confront that, even if we're sitting comfortably in Brighton or in Cholula, in my case, or in Mexico City? No, yes, we academics and students generally have reasonably comfortable lives where we're not absolutely desperate until we look around. But how do we assume that? How do we think our own madness? And for that, your book I find extremely helpful.
Yeah.
Really, I mean, yeah.
I mean, I think that, what you say also raises one question that I was sort of grappling with, sort of within the book, but also in the process of writing the book. That was, at some points, is it helpful to name these things? And sort of something that I talk about in the book a lot is this sort of this self-delusion, right? And that actually there might be times where the most effective, the only possible way to keep going is to kid yourself, to maybe to not admit to someone, to not admit to one another, and to engage in this kind of collective moments of belief that things can be different, even if we have this voice in ourselves saying, oh well, maybe not, maybe I'm not sure, but sort of doing that and entering into that collectively. And I think that can work. That's a part of again of human existence. It's very natural. But then I think what is also ultimately, I think it is important to be clear-eyed and to reflect on, some of those other motivations, those other factors that may be at play, to sort of, I suppose, be, sort of serious and say, what, we are in a bad situation. Things, as you say, things are getting worse. I am despairing. How about you? And I think, yes, we're not always actually very good at that. On the left, I think we're good at critiquing. We're good at pointing out things that are wrong in the system that we face, and I think we can be good at speaking about maybe in sort of slightly more pathologized terms about sort of burnout or tiredness. I think we've got better at that, like on the left. But I think we struggle with this kind of reckoning, I suppose, reckoning with our own shortcomings as as a movement. And I think that is something which sort of, again, and where would this, when we speak about sort of naming, identifying that madness, recognizing it in ourselves for the Kurdish movement, that would come in as part of this practice, I suppose, of self-criticism, which for them is also always a reflection on your surrounding. That self-criticism isn't about saying I'm a terrible person, I've failed, I haven't done enough, because none of us could ever possibly have done enough, but about seeing where does that hopelessness come from in us, recognizing its validity, potentially, that that we have a hopelessness because we're in a situation where it's hard for us to hope, but then also by acknowledging it, finding ways to organize and to work through it. And maybe that in some cases that will be more what Azize has been talking about in terms of thinking about some of these ideas. How can they be spread and sort of disseminated and seeded in different communities and in different struggles? Maybe in some cases, for us people in my case, it's more about that internationalist connection, and sort of there are ways in which things are more hopeless in the West, but there are also ways in which things are more hopeless, of course, in the Middle East. And so we can each sort of take up some of the slack, for one another in different ways. We can each hope in ways that the other ones can't. In the West, we can hope to have an influence on political procedures in a way that you likely can't if you are in an unrecognized statelet in Syria. If you're in an unrecognized statelet in Syria, you can hope to really build something new in a way that we might struggle to in the West. So I think having that connection, and being able to sort of support one another through that process, has been for me an important part in reckoning with that hopelessness, and maybe feeling a little bit less delusional, because I have had the opportunity to see some these kind of extraordinary processes with my own eyes, but that then enables you to come back to the sort of day-to-day, more ordinary tasks with that knowledge in mind of what might or might not be possible.
Matt, I like so much to Zapatista when talk about their experience, and they talk now. For example, they like in your book you are questioning to this vertical party organization, and the horizontal social movement is like this. They now, for example, it's called like the term like you say the horizon within the verticalist party, and they say the common and organized, and make common, and we need to be organized. It's in this sense it's so important, the solidarity, to learn together and exchange the ideas and exchange the experience is too important to create the common. But also we need to be organized what we are there. It's if we cannot organize our life, it's solidarity still is the privilege issue. I mean, you can the solidarity with people from the Gaza, but we need also a questioning the solidarity, the phenomenon of the solidarity in this time, in this century also. For example, all people stand with the Palestinian, solidarity with Palestine. It's like this, but if people in Gaza is living on this war and genocide, because we are still in our life producing the capitalism, producing all this power and domination relation. It's not enough to be solidarity. Yeah, for me it's when Zapatista in this week say we need to make a common and organized, is for me there is a word to make a light in our searching. Yeah, it's not horizontal, it's maybe it's vertical, it can be also the mixed ways, but we need to understand we need to create an international common struggle, but it's not can be it's like make a just the maybe theoretical ways. I don't know how I can explain, but for this I think it's the self-critics and critics. It's important method of we can use from learn from the Kurdish movement, but also I think before the critical and self-critical practice, there is something is important. Maybe you not catch in Rojava or another in this experience. The Kurdish movement in all this persisting struggle, 40 years, 50 years, also create the collective principle of the trust. I mean, I'm trusting my comrades. For this, I can make a criticize, and also I can doing the self-criticize. If there is not the collective trust, we can experience the criticize and the criticize, but we just fighting and the separate fragment. It's like this, yeah. And also this is important to not the work, and still is the transformation is about us, but also about with another, how I can how I'm creating the relation, my relationship with another's also is important, the part of the social transformation. For this, Kurdish women say we need to kill the state between us and within us, the male state within us and between us. What's it mean this? Because is the relation of the power and the relation of the domination is between us. It's not about just the state. I mean, if we recognize state within us, we can produce the strategy against the institutional state. I mean, because there is a state, it's horrible. They just using the way of the war, the domination, it's like violence domination. We can produce the strategy against this state, but if cannot we produce strategy against the state within us, male state within us, cannot work relationship between us. I think it's I mean, this is the philosophy of the genealogy. Yeah, it's not going to so far. It's between us. Yeah.
Yes, I think I was going to say a couple of things on this organization and trust. I would just say quickly to people, we have like I don't know, 10 minutes left. So if you do have questions for Azize, for John, or for myself, or for all of us, please do put them in the chat, and we'll try to get to them. But I think what you say about both about the organization and about trust, like between between comrades, like, for me, they are both questions about sort of hope and what you dare to believe in, what you dare to expect. And, they are both coming from hope, but they are also sources of hope. So, like, I mean, with this question of, mutual trust, like between people, that you need it as the basis for the criticism to really work. Like, I definitely saw this firsthand, that when, why does this between, and I mean, just between a small group, even of comrades, when does it work? When you have a shared idea, you have a shared goal of how you want to be, how you want to live, the kind of person you want to be, the kind of man, for example, you want to be, also the kind of woman you want to be. But if you are all actually, sort of, you don't manage to create this culture and you all have different ideas of, what is important, there's no way you can really critique and you can really exchange. So you need to have this something bigger, like, to believe in that, and that then prevents that it's not just an argument between you about who is right, or but it's about, okay, we all have the same thing in mind, we have the same principles, we have the same values, and we are all trying to get there, like, together. And that then, I think, as you say, this comes also out of the common organized no. And again, I think a sort of, if there are sort of tendencies in other movements or movements that people here may have been involved in, to sort of be fearful of kind of organization, to be fearful of like also discipline, structure. Why? It's because we are fearful that it's not going to get anywhere, it's not going to be worth it, that it's going to it's going to like recreate the it's just going to create something that's like problematic in microcosm. And I think it's important to be like aware of that. But I think why the Kurdish movement is they're confident with this goal, but they are also confident with their organizational structures, and is because each part of the movement is trusting in another part, and they all have a future vision in mind, that then I suppose it makes sense to people, right? Why I'm just doing this kind of small task today, but it's part of something much bigger. And I think like people in the Kurdish movement are able to have hope in this, which has been built up through these kind through the decades. It's not something which just comes from nothing, or from something that is like magic in like the Kurdish spirit that is not in like another spirit. It comes from people being willing to spend a long time building up this structure, and and a culture of egalitarianism, of mutual respect, and of sacrifice as well. I think sacrifice is a big part of it. And again, what does this mean? It means having something in view that is not for yourself, but it's for the people around you, or people you don't even know, but they are part of your movement, they are part of your nation, or they are part of the world that you want to be in. And that then enables people to have this commitment, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm. But I think also that when you talk about the sacrifice, martyr culture, and the prophetic, Masonic, all these things about like a Kurdish movement, I'm not agree really with this, because there is a sacrifice. It's like the Islamic culture you explain. It's okay, but I think is the differences of the Kurdish movement. It's like the same way. For example, when you think about the Arin Mirkan, when she sacrificed her body in Kobane, it's not like it's make a Masonic. It's very big act. it's a message, yeah. It's not like a very fate message. It's about if I cannot live free this life, it's about the freedom. It's not about the like a very the believing a very big hope. I mean, is the because if some person giving the life for another's, I mean, this is not about just the religion's lessons. Maybe we religion's learning.
Yeah.
Also, I think there is it's the kind of different things moving the movements. But when we start to make a similarity with some, for example, Islamist culture for us is the the domination culture. If we make a similarity between our act and this domination system, I think we're losing something very important there. Yeah.
Yeah, I think yeah, there's you like absolutely that, yeah, there's something which is particular to that there is a culture of martyrdom and respect for the martyrs in the Kurdish movement, which, yeah, and you gave the example of Arin Markan, who, yeah, people here don't know, but she was, yeah, like sacrificing her life in the defense of Kobani, this Kurdish city, against ISIS, who were attacking the city at that time, and she then, after her death, became a symbol of this Kurdish woman's resistance. And I think, yeah, there's certainly something which is particular, like, as you say, to, yeah, the role that plays in the Kurdish movement, which, you know, is a secular movement, and which, you know, doesn't believe in, of course, in any real, like, afterlife that, you know, its fighters will go to. You know, they, you know, that's not what they are fighting for. And if people are dying or sacrificing themselves, it's for, you know, for their comrades and for an ideal, as, you know, as people have in other, of course, like, socialist struggles throughout the past century. I think then, like, yeah, and then I suppose, yeah, when I've been thinking now, you know, I speak in the book, yeah, about, like, these questions of, yeah, like, martyrdom in relationship to death, and those are things which certainly can come up for us in the West. And in the book, you know, I speak about it in terms of, you know, yeah, people may kill themselves, for example, in our movements. How do we deal with that? Also thinking about how do we deal, you know, with the sort of severer challenges of, like, climate change and sort of what might await our movements in the future. For now, I think it has a lot to do with, like, you know, right now in the UK, we have, like, a lot of people who are willing to go to prison, right, which is not the same thing, of course, as losing your life, but there is this kind of willingness among people now. Like, in the UK, people getting put in jail in sort of the sort of world record, UK record numbers, for these protests in solidarity with Palestine. And, you know, I think, on why are people doing that? A lot of it is because, you know, they believe that they are part of something which is greater than themselves. And there's this belief, you know, we don't need to go into the tactics and, you know, how does all this work right now, because, yeah, that's another conversation. But there's a belief of people that, okay, I'm part of something big, and it's not just me, but there are hundreds of us, there are thousands of us, there are millions of us, right? And this sense of being part of a movement, I think, justifies for people the sacrifice, in a way, as it justifies the sacrifices that people make, like, in the Middle East. And, yeah, sort of what might sacrifice look like for each of us, like, you know, I think, yeah, it's going to be different in every individual case. And it's not, of course, that we all need to, you know, throw ourselves on a grenade, nor that, you know, we all need to get ourselves arrested at a protest. And there's a lot of kinds of sacrifice, and this is also something that I think is very important, though, in how the Kurdish movement thinks about its own martyrs. That it's not saying, you know, as, you know, so I draw this sort of comparison, though, if you're in an Islamic movement, this might be the highest, the greatest thing, and this is what to do. Whereas for the Kurdish movement, I mean, again, you know, I mean, Öcalan also, yeah, he uses these terms to explain it now, of, like, the greater and lesser struggle, that there's many kinds of sacrifice, many ways of giving, all of which come from, you know, sort of one, not trying to make yourself higher, but trying to make yourself lower, and kind of in service, particularly to your comrades around you, but also to your cause and to your movement. And, yeah, and I think, yeah, we can all think about what that might mean in our yeah, like in our movements or in our struggles. But I think you can see that same spirit, you know, is present worldwide. But at the same time, there are things which are particular, yeah, in the extent, yeah, which of course were so moving, like, and so important to many people in the Kurdish community, like during the past years of struggle, and also for those of us who have, yeah, been there or been in solidarity with that movement.
Yeah, I don't know if I understood you right, but you seem to be saying, you know, we should all be thinking, well, how do we think of sacrificing ourselves for the movement? I suppose you're not saying that. I don't know, because I think a lot of people would say no, and that's been one of the problems of the past, is this idea of sacrifice. No, and it's not. I mean, it's really, how do we carry? It is in a way capitalism that is sacrificing us, sacrificing us all every day, so that the domination of money can continue. So it's partly, how do we, or at least for me, I mean, I understand that the context is very distinct. I think for me, it's a question of, no, how do we break this logic of sacrifice? How do we think in different terms? No. And I think one of the things I wanted to say is really, I suppose, partly why, what I like about the book is that it's not, obviously you've gone through this enormous experience, fantastic, but it's not a third person book. You don't describe the Kurdish movement in the third person. You bring it out, you bring it into us. No, you don't let it be a them. And that seems to me to be absolutely fundamental. And the same with the Zapatistas. I mean, the problem, as Azize mentioned, the problem of solidarity. What solidarity does really is to third personify movements. No, we support them. No, in some cases, yeah, I mean, that's fairly inevitable, I suppose, perhaps in certain situations, like the current situation in Palestine. But really, the important thing is to understand the Kurdish movement and the Zapatista movement in terms of us. No? And there, I think your book helps an awful lot. No? And if we think of, I suppose, especially living here in Mexico, it's inevitable to make the connection between these two movements, because they are really the two great rethinkings, aren't they, of the meaning of revolution in the 20th, 21st century. I mean, both of them start from a recognition of the failure of 20th century state-centered revolution. Both of them say, no, we really have to rethink this. We have to get away from the state. We have to get away from the idea of taking state power. And this means rethinking all our relations, the whole question of how we organize. No? And it means essentially moving to some sort of communal organization. Again, there are always problems in communal organization, and there is a question of, yeah, maybe total horizontalism doesn't work. I mean, the Zapatista slogan of mandar obedeciendo, no? To rule by obeying, isn't horizontalist, but I mean, in the sense that it recognizes the necessity of some sort of authority, but it is an authority that has to obey the people, the people involved, the people of the communities, and their present rethinking and self-criticism of pyramidal structures, no, really points in the same direction. And what I mentioned earlier on, the recent thing of organize our desperation. How do we organize our desperation? Not just the question of how do we feel or analyze our desperation, but how do we organize our desperation? How do we organize our hope against hope, or hope even without hope, if you like? But which is really what I think Azize was emphasizing a moment ago as well. It's really and what you were emphasizing is really the question of thinking for ourselves, wherever we are. How do we go beyond this feeling of desperation, which we probably all share, and which is so widespread at the moment in society, not just on the so-called left, but also on the right. Now, how do we think? How do we intervene in this desperation? How do we think it? How do we organize it? How do we, without just romanticizing? That seems to me a very great contribution of your book.
Yes, and I mean, and I think in general, it's the questions that emerge out of, for me, the questions and the challenges that emerge out of, at some point actually I was going to call the book like Lessons from Rojava, but then we changed it for a couple of reasons, but one of which was sort of, I mean, I suppose fundamentally it's not a question actually of, well, this is what they're doing right and this is what we're all doing wrong, so we should just sort of do things more like they're doing, and that would be the answer. But sort of doing, I think it's also a question of doing Rojava the respect, doing the Kurdish movement the respect of this kind of serious engagement, and using it to open these questions, and then thinking about what are the sort of what are the parallels, what are the analogies, what are the ways in which that can contribute. And so the book, I think, hopefully the spirit in which it was written, and I hope the spirit in which it is received as well, is very much not a sort of manifesto, it's not a lecture to other movements about sort of simply what's happening in Kurdistan, although there are of course there are particular things to celebrate there, but about trying to open some questions, open some challenges, convey some of the way that they're thinking about things differently, and the hope that we could think about things differently as well. And I think that's also why I wanted John and Azize to join us here today. I think we are pretty much out of time, but Azize, please.
Also you can consider it like a manifesto, because it's important. We need more manifestos. We need more thinking about how we can find the different strategies. I think it's in this sense your book, it's giving a lot of idea and a lot of discussion and a lot of very important issues we couldn't talk here, but I think you will still going to talk with another peoples. I think you can consider like a manifesto also.
Yes, I hope so. I say in the book, we need we're in a time of manifestos. So there will be more. Maybe some of you listening as well have your own manifestos in you, and you should of course also read Azize's great book that I mentioned already, and follow her work, and of course John's work that I'm sure people here are familiar with, but which has maybe something of the manifesto also. Please do. In general, everyone, thank you for coming. Keep supporting Firestorm, and thank you to them for hosting this event as well. And I guess my final point would be, as I think has been clear today, we all think what's happening in Rojava is so important, and this sort of serious, engaged, critical interest, support, solidarity with what's happening there, as not just as a sort of humanitarian issue and how bad it is, but in terms of what it can offer and what it can give, is tremendously important. So I hope everyone keeps following that, whether through our work or through any of the other channels or platforms that are available, and keeps thinking and talking about what's happening there. So thank you. Liberty, I don't know if you want to say something, or if we can just
to appreciate all three of you. No, thank you so much for treating us all to a conversation with a lot of depth to it. And as we said, there's so much more in this book. I hope people will pick it up and read it if they haven't already. I'm sorry that we can't spend even more time together today, but Matt, John, Azize, thank you so much for being here with us this morning, afternoon, evening, whatever time it happens to be for you.
Yeah, thanks very much.
Thank you.
Indeed,
Thank you very much.
Thank
Thank you, John and Azize.
Take care, folks.